Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everybody, welcome to our 26th session of Truth Be Told, and today is April the 14th, 2021. We have a CPA in our church, Uri Browning Jr., and he's always happy for April 15th to come along, because he's just worn out from tax season. People like me waiting to the last minute to give him all the information.
Right.
But this year they made a decision to stretch it out till May 15th, I think. So extra month. And I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse to him, because it just means a longer tax season.
Yes. Yeah.
And not necessarily easier, but yeah, he says it's really been interesting this year because the Congress has changed a lot of the tax laws, but they've changed them just recently. So he said he's been holding a lot of people's returns because depending on what they decide and put into the laws, it's going to affect this year's returns. And yet tax season's almost over, so he's having to try to stay on top of everything. Anyway, I'm Rick Howard here in Modesto, California, and Mike Maney in Missoula, Montana. And I really shouldn't do this every time because I'm sitting here looking at just gorgeous weather, slight breeze, going to be about 75 today. The flowers are blooming, the bees are buzzing. The leaves on the trees, it's just almost perfect weather. And when we came on before the recording started, Mike had a heavy jacket on, and he said his hands were freezing. He was drinking hot coffee, and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Missoula in the middle of April. So, but he did say he put away his snow shovel today,
Yes.
which probably means there's going to be a snowstorm tomorrow.
Yes, of course. Murphy's Law.
You did, and you also did say that 3 Junes in a row you had a freak snowstorm. So I don't know if I would call that too freaky if it happens 3 years in a row. That's kind of a pattern.
It's kind of a pattern. Yes. I'll let you know this June how it turns out. Oh man!
Now it makes sense why your Bible conference is never in June.
In June,
usually in July and August.
Yes, yeah.
So
when
July and August, so from about the middle of June to Labor Day is really nice.
Yes. We love it. But my hands are still freezing right now, though. It's 62 in the house.
There are pluses and minuses to everywhere, huh?
Yes, yeah.
This gym I belong to, there's this young woman. She has, I think, 3 young children, and her husband is a physical therapist who works at a local hospital. And she said that her parents own, I think she said 60 or 80, some amount of acres in northern Idaho around Hayden Lake and north of Coeur d'Alene. And she has a couple of siblings. They're married with kids. And so the parents asked if they would all want to relocate to northern Idaho together and each, have 5 or 10 acres to build a house on and resettle up there. And I think they're all going to do that.
Wow.
And,
wow.
So, we've all been talking here lately. We get together for gym class. People have allergies. The air here in the Central Valley is, I joke around about what nice weather we're having, but everyone's sneezing and using allergy medicine.
Right.
Allergies are really bad here in the valley because this Central Valley is really interesting. It has just a few little inlets from the ocean, from the Pacific Ocean on the west. So there's usually a little breeze comes into the valley, but there's no outlet on the other side, on the east side against the Sierra Nevada mountains. And the valley is pretty narrow. It's 20 miles wide or 25 or something at points, wider at other points. And it's 300 miles north and south. So the air just kind of gets trapped in here. And all of the pollen, all of the exhaust from automobiles, all of the agricultural sprays and poisons that they put on the crops, it all gets mixed in the air here. And we have some of the, even though this is like, the ag capital of the world, number one place for many crops are right here in the Central Valley.
Yeah.
The abundance of fruit and vegetables. But the downside is the air is actually not very clean, not very healthful at all. If you have allergies or even for just chemicals. And so a lot of people seek elsewhere to live. They have bad allergy problems.
You have air filtration in the house or what?
Yeah, a lot of people have air filtration in the house, but if you go outside, and usually the weather is so nice here, a good part of the year, you want to be outside.
Yeah, that's right.
And, you have to deal with the downside of it. So she was talking about moving to northern Idaho, how clean the air is. And I said, well, when air gets like really cold, it gets clean. And so clean air, but frost, ice, snow for months and months.
Yeah.
So every place has an upside and a downside.
Yeah. Well, when she faces that 30 degrees below zero and she breathes in through her nostrils and her nostrils stick, she'll be thinking of the Central Valley.
But she'll say, "Oh, the air is so fresh here."
It's so fresh. Yes. Oh man.
But there are many people moving out of California because of the politics and seeking maybe to move to red states. A lot of people moving to Idaho.
Yeah. A
lot to Texas, of course.
Yeah.
A lot of people I've heard are moving to like Tennessee, so even further east. And a lot of people's roots come from there. During the Depression and Dust Bowl of the 30s, that's where a lot of people in California came from, was the whole South. And so, they kind of have these roots back there anyway. So it kind of calls them back home. And they get tired of bureaucracy and high taxes and far left government and everything like that. So I understand that, but
no, is your governor recalled? He's not recalled yet, Newsom.
It's not official yet. I think they have enough signatures, but you can never escape it completely. And in this internet age, the world is smaller, and these high tech companies, whatever schemes they have going to control our lives and to monitor everything that we do and every penny we spend. It doesn't matter where you live.
Right.
They're going to hound you and haunt you and control you. And so maybe some of the outward things may improve if you move elsewhere. But, as time goes on, I don't know that it's going to be a lot different no matter where you live.
Yeah. There'll be no place to run.
Especially once the mark of the beast comes in and it's great tribulation and all that.
Yeah.
No place to hide. Be much difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So easy for me to say since my kids and grandkids in church are here, I have no plans to leave. But other people have different reasons to consider leaving. Yeah. But I really like what Ryan Miller said at the meeting.
Yes.
I really appreciated that because people think about leaving because of politics or because of taxes or because of just whatever. Yeah. But where is the Lord? Where is a good, solid Bible church? Where are those things that should be more important? Exactly. And what did he say? He said, we're on the front lines of the battle here. Why do we want to leave? This is where the Lord wants us to be, to fight the battle. Yeah. Boy, that was really a timely word, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. That caught my ear. Yeah. Because wherever you go, people need the Lord. I mean, wherever you go. And some have to, stay and fight. They do. Because when the good people leave, it leaves all the bad people, and those are the people you want to reach.
Who's going to be a witness to them, huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So you're saying between pollen and politics, people are leaving.
That'd make a good book, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah.
Pollen and politics.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll get right on that.
So I'm thinking of a way to segue into Joseph, because I think we pretty much covered Jacob in the last few sessions.
Yeah.
And maybe one way to segue into Joseph, and kind of to continue a theme that we swerved into last time and spent more time than I expected, because it just kind of opened up to us, is Jacob being broken by the Lord. Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned something like, none of us want to be broken. None of us like the prospect of being broken. It's painful. It's crushing to our pride. It means we have to be completely humble and surrendered. Yeah. And our flesh doesn't want any of that. So we resist being broken. But you said something like, has anyone regretted it afterwards? Mm-hmm. And I like that. Mm-hmm. You know, I resisted being saved, and yet I rejoiced afterwards.
Yes.
There's been times since then where the Lord's broken me down some because my pride got too much control and painful. You know, it's kind of embarrassing or whatever. You have to admit to yourself that I only thought I was really serving the Lord and dedicated to Him, and I was operating in the flesh more than I cared to admit. And He showed me, and I had to repent of it and realize, as one of the Psalms says, how frail I am. Mm-hmm. And we really are frail. We are. Yeah. But it's in weakness that we're made strong, and it's in our brokenness. Mm-hmm. And so then we also talked about how that Jacob really couldn't be changed from Jacob to Israel until after he was broken. Mm-hmm. So that brokenness was a blessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it takes wrestling with God all night, and knocking our hip out of joint, and walking with a limp the rest of our life.
Yeah.
It takes all that.
Yeah. You know, if we're talking about, at the end of the day, being conformed to the image of Christ, and He set the example that we should walk thereafter in it. And you mentioned last week that Jesus was broken. Mm-hmm. He wasn't broken due to His own, sinfulness, but for the sins of us. He became broken. He volunteered for that process. He set the course. He set the standard. And so, if we want to conform to His image, that's part of the process, because He wants to be surrounded by a group of people who were broken and then rebuilt by Him. Mm-hmm. If there's any there that were not, then there's going to be a reserved pride. Hey, I wasn't broken, or I rebuilt myself, or whatever it is. But that bride will all have gone through the similar process of different circumstances, of course, but all will have that quality that they all were broken and then rebuilt by Christ. And so that's His bride. That's what He wants. And that's the only way you can submit.
So He was bruised for our iniquities. He said, when He established the Lord's Supper, this is my body, which was broken for you.
Yes. Yeah.
But more than His body was broken, it's something deeper than just the breaking of His body. The surrender of His will to the Father. Mm-hmm. He said, it's not my doctrine, it's His doctrine. I don't speak anything other than what He tells me. I don't do anything other than what He tells me to do. Well, Jesus was God incarnate, and yet He was still broken in the sense of totally surrendered to another. In this sense, His Father. So His Father had only His best interest at heart, but still there was a brokenness of spirit. Mm-hmm. When David prayed that Psalm 51, a broken heart and a contrite spirit. But Jesus had a broken heart and a contrite spirit. Mm-hmm. Out of purity, not because He had sinned or disobeyed or anything, but as our example of what true brokenness is. When He emptied Himself, He allowed Himself to be broken. Mm-hmm. And I bring this part up again as a segue into Joseph, because we're going to kind of list some ways Joseph was a type of Christ, but one way he was a type of Christ is Joseph was broken, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And yet, like Christ, we wouldn't necessarily say it was his own sin or his own fault. And, people argue or discuss back and forth there in Genesis 37 when we're introduced to him, when he was given a coat of many colors. He was his father's favorite son. He had those dreams. He had to run and tell his brothers. And people conjecture whether maybe it was a little bit of, because he was just 17, a bunch of older brothers.
Yeah.
So it'd be just kind of natural to say, hey, I had this dream that one day you may bow down to me. Was there a little bit of bragging or a little bit of pride or a little bit too anxious to let his brothers know that? We don't know for sure. We don't know what his motives were. On the other side, people argue that he was just telling the facts and he was just sharing information and it was all out of pure motives and he had nothing to do with wanting to tell his big brothers that they're going to bow down to him someday. So we're not really told.
Right. Yeah.
And even when he was sold as a slave and then put into prison, all those kind of events in his life is a brokenness, wasn't it? And we can discuss whether in most of it would say he was innocent, not guilty, not committed any crime to deserve it like Christ. But it's still showing, because he is such a perfect type of Christ, the Lord is showing us a brokenness.
Yeah.
And even in the Psalms, it talks about he was in prison until he was placed in irons. And Hebrew language can sometimes be a little bit variable in its translation. And some translations have a footnote and say that in Hebrew it could possibly mean the iron entered into his soul. Kind of the idea that part of the purpose of prison was to prepare him for the glory that would come afterwards. Kind of like Christ. The suffering had to happen first and before the glory. So Joseph really follows that pattern of brokenness, not necessarily because of his own misdeeds or faults, but others did it to him, and he was willing to accept it. He was a slave in Egypt, but he was a young man, full of energy, and he knew how to travel cross country, and he's just taking care of his father's sheep and everything. And I think, why didn't he just escape? Why didn't he just go back to his father? So again, being a type of Christ, he was willing to accept what he did not deserve, willing to be broken on behalf of God's will, so that at the end, when his brothers were restored to him, and they were afraid, after Jacob died, they were afraid now Joseph would take his vengeance out on him. And he found out about it. He says, hey, you meant it to me for evil, but God meant it to me for good.
Yeah. What a perspective.
Yeah. So he understood the providential hand of God.
Yeah.
We don't know if he understood it all along, but there was a spirit of willingness to accept the harm being done to him undeservedly. And this is the kind of, you look online, sermons and lessons about Joseph as a type of Christ has to be on the top 10 of all lessons and sermons. Who hasn't been teaching or preaching for more than a few years and has not brought a message on Joseph as a type of Christ? Yeah.
It's just so obvious.
There's a lot there.
Yeah. It's so obvious.
And there's a lot there, and it's enjoyable. It's rich. Yeah. And it's just a way to show the unity of the Bible, Joseph being like a type of Christ. And so I've, formed my own list through the years, and I preached on it several times, and no doubt you have. You showed me your PowerPoint and your documents of the list you've done, and so we'll kind of compare those a little bit today. But it's just go online and look at what others have come up with.
Yeah.
And I found one that listed 60 different types of Christ in the life of Joseph.
Wow.
And then I found one had 74. He came up with a list of 70. And I'm looking at those, with 60 and 74, and I'm kind of reading their comments and about it and things. And you just kind of get this feeling like, okay, Joseph is a powerful type of Christ. There's a lot to say about it, but this is not a competition who can come up with the longest list.
I know.
and a lot, the longer lists are just kind of, they break down the major ones into maybe 3 or 4 little subsections.
Oh yeah.
Which is okay.
Yeah.
It's just okay. It's beautiful to look at as a subject, really enjoyable. But
yeah.
But the goal is not to come up with the longest list.
Did you say 74? That's it. I'm going to come up with 80.
No, I think that's when I say domino. I surrender you.
I thought my list was exhaustive at about 12.
Yeah, you have 12. I think I came up with about 12. I mean, I often, and whenever I start forming lists that have to do anything, especially with prophecy, I usually just try to stick with 3, 7, or 12.
Yeah.
Such important prophetic numbers.
Right.
And usually it's not too hard to end up with 3, 7, or 12. But Joseph was a great man. He's one of these like Enoch and Daniel and Job, that you can't find anything bad to say.
Yeah.
And we just got through looking at Jacob, all kinds of bad things to say.
Yeah.
So with Joseph,
yeah. And what's interesting with Joseph, we also see with Christ, and I don't think I included this. Maybe this is one of the 74. But these traits showed up early in Joseph's life. I mean, even at 17, he was a responsible son to his father, of course. Mm-hmm. And then he goes to Egypt. And so even as a young man, there was just this quality, this innocence about him. The whole thing with Potiphar's wife and all of this. So even as a young man, he showed this resolve, to maintain a integrity. Okay. And we see that early with Jesus at 12, being serious about his father's business, and just showing that he could handle himself in the scriptures, asking questions, answering questions. So these things quite often appear when we're young, and it really sets the course for many other decisions down the road, And so maybe that was one of the 7. That's one of the 7. It's got to be on the 74 list.
Well, maybe let's just start. You have your list there. I have my list here. We'll just kind of go through some of these, but there's a lot in just chapter 37 where we're introduced to Joseph. And you have a list of 12. I'm looking at my sermon outline. I divided mine just to be different than what I've done before. I divided them into types of Christ's first coming and types of Christ's second coming.
Oh, I love it. All right.
Most of them would probably apply to Christ's first coming. But there are definitely some that should be applied to Christ's second coming.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So you put those two categories together, and Joseph certainly is the most complete type of Christ in the Bible.
Okay. Now, is that in a Word file, a Word document that you have your list there?
Yes, it is, sir.
Why don't we maybe make that, I could put that online if you'd like, and we could make that available to our viewers if they would like to see that list.
As usual, when you make these kind of requests from me for outlines, let me clean it up a little bit.
Okay. All right.
A lot of my sermon outlines, they're easily understandable to me as I'm going through it.
Yeah.
But someone just picking up and looking at it, they think, what in the world was he thinking about?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have, on this particular outline I'm looking at, I also have quite a bit of scribbling in pencil between the lines and arrows and things.
Yeah.
the things I thought of after I printed it out. I was too lazy to go back and add it and reprint it and all that. So I just wrote it in real quick.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I
need to clean it up some before I let it be in the hands of anyone else.
But let me ask our viewers, our viewing audience right now. How many of you, raise your hand? How many of you would like to have Rick's outline? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. I'm seeing several right now raise their hands. So we'll definitely make that available once you clean it up.
You remind me of my instructor of these gym classes. I take these group classes, and there's anywhere from 12 to 20 people in these classes. And she's having us do all sorts of moves. You know, some of them involve raising your hands above your head.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, she always waits at just the right time. How many are just so happy to be here today? Raise your hands. The whole class is raising their hands, even if we're drenched in sweat and about ready to quit and not really happy that we're there. But she makes sure our hands are being raised at the right time. So chapter 37 of Genesis is the genealogy of Jacob, verse 1 and 2. And Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. So right away, one that we would include is that he was a shepherd of a flock.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a big one about Christ, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it says he was feeding the flock with his brothers. Jesus started his church, added apostles to the church right away, according to 1 Corinthians 12. And along with his apostles and Christ together, they were feeders of the flock, owned by the Father. And so right away, it's just John chapter 10 and all sorts of wonderful passages about Christ being the great shepherd, the good shepherd, choosing his apostles to be the feeders of the flock. They were his brothers. They were his friends, and you know, anytime you're talking about types in the Bible, it's kind of like parables. You press them to a certain point, but don't press them too far.
Yeah.
In this case,
right. Yeah.
The brothers of Joseph were the ones who sold him into slavery, and the apostles never did that to Christ, even though they were not always the most loyal and faithful and strong and dependable. We wouldn't compare them to Joseph's brothers in every way, but just the idea, the principle of feeding the flock with his brothers, the flock owned by his father Jacob, is a really good picture of Christ and his apostles and the early church. And we're going through John 17 right now on Wednesday nights, and Jesus talks several times about they were yours and you gave them to me. So the Father owns the flock, but he gives us to Christ as our elder brother. And together with Christ, especially as pastors, we are to feed the Father's flock, of which Christ is the good shepherd. So that's one right away. And then the rest of verse 2, the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. And this is one that's not normally included in a lot of the lists I see. I don't even know if I included it. But the idea of bringing a bad report to his father of his brethren. Now, in a real sense, that's the report Jesus brought back to the Father about the condition of his brethren, Israel. It was a bad report. Now, did Joseph make up things about his brothers to bring this bad report? No, he reported the truth about them. And Jesus, in essence, brought a bad report to the Father about the condition of the nation of Israel. So, this would probably be one of those on that list of 74 where some would say, okay, you're trying to look for too many types of Christ. But I mean, it kind of jumps out a little bit. Brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel, meaning Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a tunic of many colors. Well, right away we would think of a number of verses. Think of Philippians 2, where um, God loves all of his children, but he has given a special son a name above all names, a tunic of many colors, a glorified position above the other sons. Yeah, so it's easy to see.
Yeah. And being the firstborn, of course, he has a double portion.
Yeah, he received the firstborn blessing, even though he was son number 11. I mean, he was the firstborn of Rachel, but in order of all the brothers, he was number 11, and yet to Joseph was given the birthright.
The status,
Yeah, the status, because he earned it, because Jacob said when he blessed all of his sons in chapter 49, he describes Joseph as separate from his brothers. And I've preached on that. Really preaches good, because it's not just separate in miles, he was separate in character.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's interesting. I don't know if you brought this out when you preached that passage, but after he disclosed who he was to them, he basically his advice to them as they would go back home to get their father and bring him back. He told them to not fall out along the way. he knew that they would probably get into a huge argument over, I told you not to do that, or whatever, just. But he realized, as you said earlier, that he came to the conclusion that it was for good and not evil. So he wanted them to have that perspective and not just to get in a huge argument over on the way back and lose the focus of everything. So I thought that was interesting. He knew his brothers very well.
Yes, he did. So when his brothers, in verse 4, saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. There's a lot about why the Jewish leaders ended up hating Christ, but one of them is what Pilate said. I know, because of envy. Envy. He drew the crowds. The people loved to be around him. They loved him because he healed them of their sicknesses and diseases. He fed them. He was displayed all the character that the Jewish leaders did not have, and they hated him for it, because there was something inside of them, I think, that they knew he was a much better version of what God was looking for than they were. But outwardly they said he has a devil. They said he's an imposter. They said he's all sorts of things. But, people kind of know when they're around someone who has a better, deeper character than they do.
Kind of reminds me of something a little more recent, how that someone of a leadership status was more popular by a long shot than others. And so the others, to take that person down, began to call him names, began to present him in a very bad light, until they finally just stole the election.
I kind of knew where you were going.
You knew where I was going. I couldn't help it. Sorry. Well,
I mean, that's what envy does, though.
That's what envy does.
You seek to destroy them, and the Democrat leaders, they tried to point out a lot of things about Trump they said they didn't like, but what they really, really, really hated was envy.
His popularity.
At how the big crowds he could draw.
Yes.
The enthusiasm. They could only wish.
I know, really.
They could have that.
Yeah.
And they claim that's not important, and they claim that's not reason they hated him and things. But human jealousy and envy. It produces all sorts of terrible things. So he's hated by his brothers, and there's a number of verses in the New Testament that talks about how they ended up plotting against him in Christ. They held council meetings. And it's kind of what the brothers ended up doing is they
Yeah.
held a council meeting, didn't they?
Uh-huh.
Because they didn't
Yeah.
quite know what to do with him. They threw him in that pit, trying to figure it all out. And I think one of the things you have on your list, you have number 1, loved by their father. Number 2, sent on a mission by the father. His father sent him out there to check on his brothers, which is exactly what Christ came to do.
Yeah, right.
Check on his brothers.
Yeah.
Bring a report back to the father. Well, the report was bad.
Yeah.
And they didn't like it.
Yeah.
He was envied by his brothers, rejected by his brothers, and he ends up being sold for pieces of silver, delivered to the Gentiles. And that's kind of your first 5. That's pretty much my first 5. Mm-hmm. Sold for money, sent by his father to his brothers, and sold for pieces of silver. I mean, all of this just jumps out. There's really no need to go into it too much. It's so obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I wonder if it says the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah in verse 2, and I really never thought this through much before, but it's just thinking back to the life of Jacob. Back in chapter 33, there might be something there. Remember when Jacob was coming back to meet Esau, and he was afraid for his life. He was almost certain that Esau was going to take vengeance out on him. Mm-hmm. It says in verse 1 and 2 of chapter 33, Jacob lifted his eyes, looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him 400 men. Well, that scared the daylights out of you right there. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants, and he put the maidservants and their children in front, in case he was coming for vengeance. Mm-hmm. They would take the brunt of it. Mm-hmm. They were like more expendable, less important.
Yeah, lesser important.
And I wonder if when Jacob or Joseph went out, saw the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, was there already kind of a built-in animosity as they looked back at this, because they knew what was going on? I mean, they knew their father Jacob was expecting trouble from Esau. Mm-hmm. And they kind of knew, okay, why are our mothers and us, why are we out here in front?
On the front lines. Yeah.
And then why are Leah's, says in verse 2, he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Got to protect my favorite son.
Mm-hmm. That's what it is. Yeah.
So it adds an element that is normally not connected, I think, in 37 and 2, where Joseph was with those brothers who were in the front of danger, where he was back protected with his, behind everyone else. Mm-hmm. So there's already bad blood. And so it made it easy when he starts telling them the dreams that he had. And they said in verse 8, his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? And shall you have dominion over us?" And it says in verse 7 about the sheaves, "Your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And then at the end of verse 9, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me. Mm. This idea of bowing down to me.
Yeah.
He said, we will never bow down to you. We will never.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is they ended up bowing to him at least 4 times.
Yeah.
Now, you talk about a type of Christ.
Wow.
Remember when they said, what was it, Luke 19? We will not have this man reign over us. Mm-hmm. Yet when he comes back, they will bow down to him.
Yes. Yeah.
And they will gladly have him reign over them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a beautiful picture of both the first and second coming of Christ.
Yeah.
And this idea of bowing down. Because they did end up bowing down to him.
You know, this whole idea of favoritism, well, we even see that when they were sitting down at the table and he gave his brother Benjamin, wasn't it? Was it 5 times or
Oh yeah.
more food? So I mean, that just runs throughout. That whole thing, favoritism.
Well, I mean, it goes back to Isaac and Rebekah with Jacob and Esau.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it goes back even though Abraham may have not felt it quite this strong, but Sarah did, certainly.
Yeah.
Get this kid and his mom out of here.
Yeah.
He shall not be heir with my son. So it's all the way through, wasn't it?
It is, yeah.
But
it is.
But even though we look at it in a human way that way, produced envy and strife and all that, on a higher level, it was simply the outworking of God's election, His selection of who would be the heirs, who would be the favorite promised son,
right? Yeah,
and all the way to Christ. I mean, God was not anyway ashamed to let it be known, this is my beloved son.
Yeah,
I may have many sons, but this is my only begotten beloved of all.
Yeah,
and even Jesus, he had his inner circle. Peter,
he
James,
did.
and John.
Yep,
and it was really obvious.
Yeah.
So, it's easy for us to say, well, they shouldn't have played favorites, and it produced all kinds of problems and everything. But a lot of times, pastors are told, you can't have favorites in the church because and it causes problems.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It's just
a lot of godly people did in the Bible, and
they did. Yeah.
Paul did.
Yeah.
Paul said about Timothy, I mean, Paul had a lot of helpers that he loved deeply.
Yeah.
And yet he was not afraid to say, I have no one like-minded who would care for the things that I care about than Timothy.
Yeah.
It was very obvious Timothy was his favorite.
Yeah. If anything, you should want to see who's being selected and make sure you're on that team.
As Brother Worski used to like to describe election in a corporate sense, he'd say, well, election is kind of like, the airline company says this flight leaves at this time and is headed to this destination, and then you decide whether you want to buy a ticket and get on board.
Yeah, right.
But that plane's going to go there with or without you.
With or without you. That's right.
So it's kind of a simplistic, a pretty clear way to describe election. Yeah. God has a purpose in mind, a destination, and that destination is going to be accomplished. And you have a role to play whether you get on board or not.
Yeah.
So he sold for money. That's chapter 37, 27 and 28. Even before that, and you have here, he was sent on a mission by the Father. That's in verse 13. His father said, Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. So the directive of the Father and the willingness of the Son. Yeah. And there it is right there. That's the book of John right there.
I know. Yeah.
So, I mean, these are just kind of simple and obvious, and everyone has made their own list of these things, but it is enjoyable to go over them and see how obvious they are.
Yeah.
And see the connection to Christ. And then he was turned over to the Gentiles when they threw him in the pit. They said, look, in verse 18, now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Somewhat the attitude of the Jewish leaders when Christ was born, when he came. Let us now kill him, cast him into some pit. We shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. So Reuben stepped in, which is kind of counter to how Jacob describes him in chapter 49. Reuben is my firstborn, but he's unstable as water.
Yeah.
But this doesn't seem unstable. This is pretty resolute.
Yeah.
I mean, he's standing up to all of his brothers and saying, no, let's not kill him. Let's do something else.
Maybe he was bipolar. This is a manic.
Maybe that's why he was unstable as well.
That's right.
Interesting.
Interesting. What's interesting is this is a conversation between these brothers that is recorded here, and there's a number of places in John where conversations are being recorded, as it were, within the group of the Pharisees.
And it was
Gives you an
a
insight.
Question, wasn't it? What shall we do with him?
Yeah.
Shall we kill him?
Yeah.
We're trying to put pressure on him. We're trying to make him look bad. We're trying to threaten people who follow after him, put them out of the synagogue. We're trying everything we can do to counter him, but maybe we should start considering death, murder.
Yeah.
And that's what they ended up choosing.
It's exactly, yeah.
It's interesting what Judah ended up saying. They put him in a pit, and they sat down to eat a meal, verse 25. And this is interesting, isn't it? We're not told how close this pit is, but in my mind, my imagination, they're right near the edge of the pit. And Joseph's down there in the pit. Mm-hmm. And they're sitting up, eating, and discussing what to do with him. And he's hearing all this. Well, I mean, one reason I don't think it's too much of a stretch of imagination is because Jesus knew their thoughts and their hearts, didn't he? He knew they were having meetings. Yeah. They were talking about what to do with him. Yeah. Joseph listening to his brothers. Jesus, in essence, was listening into the discussions of the Jewish leaders. Mm-hmm. He knew exactly what they were talking about. So that kind of fits here.
I wonder if from the bottom of the pit, Joseph is saying, I say we let him go. But probably not.
I guess that's possible. Maybe I didn't quite have those dreams right. Now, let me reword the dreams.
Oh, terrible. Your imagination could just take off.
So they sat down to eat a meal in verse 25. They lifted their eyes and looked, and there was coming a company of Ishmaelites. So here's Ishmael again.
Yeah.
Coming back.
Yeah.
He's going to get involved in this story.
It's like that bad Gilead,
with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. Spices, balm, and myrrh to carry them to Egypt. But they ended up taking Joseph to Egypt, who ended up being embalmed in Egypt with what? Spices and balm and myrrh. Who else do we know that spices and balm and myrrh were brought to? Because Joseph was, in essence, dead after this, wasn't he? At least dead to Jacob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And so here's a real picture of the burial process of Christ shown in type in what's going on here in Joseph, not being killed, but really dead in a way. Mm-hmm. And he's carried down to Egypt with the same things that Jesus was put on his body at his burial. Interesting.
Yeah, not dead, but considered dead, but not really dead.
And Judah said to his brothers in verse 26, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him. Judah, of course, the bloodline tribe of Christ, is the one that speaks up partly on his behalf. These brothers are, it's interesting what they're doing. They're negotiating with each other, aren't they? Mm-hmm. That they all kind of want to get rid of him. Some may want to kill him. Some just want to sell him. Others, maybe some other ideas. But they're discussing what to do with Joseph. And as you said, there were lots of discussions about what to do with Christ. come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. And of course, then sold as a slave into Egypt, turned over to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
So the Jews, even though they wanted Christ dead, in essence, they said, let us not kill him. Since we really can't, we don't have the authority to. But let's turn him over to the Gentiles and let them do that for us. So the Gentiles became involved in the death of Christ, as had to happen, so that everyone is guilty.
Right.
The blood of Christ,
Yeah.
Jew and Gentile alike.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we see this, and not just by accident, that Gentiles come into this scheme of getting rid of a type of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it really is just kind of unfolding right before our eyes, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
And that it would be Ishmaelites is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that half brother of Isaac.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think full circle is going to be relatives of the Ishmaelites who are poised with their weaponry toward Jesus when he returns. It'll be that 10 Confederate group of nations over there in the Middle East, Muslims, who do not want to see Jesus return and take over the world.
And it describes him also in verse 28 as Midianite, which is one of the sons by Keturah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was just like you're saying, it's
all
all of their half brothers, so on and so forth, being involved here, as it will in the future. Mm-hmm. All of these are going to gang up against Joseph, aren't they? Against Jacob, against Israel.
Yeah.
And they took Joseph to Egypt. As God promised to Abraham, they're going to be taken to a people and end up being slaves to them, servants to them.
Yes, yes.
And then they had to come up with this.
Oh, yeah.
Took
this story.
Yeah, this garment of that Jacob had given to him and dipped it in blood, brought it back to the father. This is really ugly stuff, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one thing to envy your brother. It's one thing to sell him into slavery. It's all that's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But to do this to your father.
Yeah.
One sin leads to the next, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What do they say? It's not the sin itself, but it's the cover up that's the worst part of it.
Yeah.
They have to cover it up.
Yeah.
So how do they cover it up? Well, they come up with this story of finding his tunic all bloody, and they were willing to break their father's heart to cover up their own sin. Mm-hmm. Did they have any conscience at all?
No. No, they didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
not until Joseph revealed himself did they go back to this moment in time and recollect all the pieces along the way.
Sin is coming back to get us, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Our crime.
Yeah.
But we've seen this as pastors, where we find out some messes that people have gotten their lives into.
Yeah.
And as it all unfolds to us, we realize, and sometimes we end up telling the people, well, if you just come clean at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But then you had to commit so many more sins to cover it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, the Bible says, be sure your sin will find you out.
Yeah. And the saying is, if you don't like the hole you're in, stop digging.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking, when they brought it back, it says in verse 34, Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. I mean, the ones that had done this to him are trying to comfort him. And I have this underlined in my Bible because we all go through things in life that for a time at least, we are very much like Jacob, but he refused to be comforted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some things happen in our lives that there just is no comfort at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just you got to get through that deep grief.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Jacob even says, I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. So his father wept for him. So just really destroyed the life of their father to cover up their own sin. And, that lasted for how many years? Lasted for 13, 20, let's say 22 years. So, because he was 17 here, and he was 30 when he came out of prison, stood before Pharaoh, and then there were 7 good years of plenty. So he's 37. And then by the time Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt to buy grain, they told Joseph, or Joseph said, but they made it known as the famine has been 2 years old now. So Joseph is 39 when his brothers come down. So he had been away from his father for 22 years. And then ever how much longer it took for Jacob to end up in Egypt. So 22 years minimum, they allowed their father to be crushed to cover up, to cover up their envy. I mean, had Joseph done anything to them? He just told them about a dream. And he was his father's favorite. So it's just envy. He had not really harmed them in any way. He hadn't done anything. He had not sinned against them. So it, like Christ, it was undeserved.
Right. Yeah.
And Christ made it known that he was the Messiah, that he was the promised one, that he was going to be their ruler. But he had done them no harm. He just preached the truth to them about who he was and what his role was. And just that information was enough to stir up hatred and murder. So just the information here, telling the dreams and so forth, and knowing that he was the father's favorite was enough to go to this extreme. It's amazing the places envy developing into hatred will take us. And we just want to destroy that person. And yet, have they really done anything harmful to us? It's what we've allowed to build up in our own heart. That's causing it. Not anything they've done to us. I'd like to tell people, because we get so caught up with what we think people are saying about us, thinking about doing to us, plotting against us. Or maybe how often we think they're thinking about sins we've committed or things we've done wrong or anything like that.
I think the Bible calls that evil surmisings.
I like to remind people from time to time, we would be less concerned what people think about us if we realized how little they do. We think they're thinking about us all the time. And we may just be a speck on their radar screen. We may think about them just in passing. But we tend to think they're just like plotting and scheming and thinking evil against us all the time.
That's the narcissism.
It's exactly what it is. And we, and we do so much harm to ourselves, thinking that people are obsessed with us, and they really aren't.
It's really self-idolatry.
It really is, isn't it?
It is.
Why do we get so offended? Because we love ourselves so much.
Yeah.
Why do we get our feelings hurt so easily?
Yeah.
Because we're narcissists.
Yeah, we're narcissists. Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of this is, when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So he just assumes we already love ourselves.
Right.
There's nowhere in the Bible that says you need to learn to love yourself.
Yeah.
And what the world says is our greatest need to learn to love ourselves more.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible says is our greatest problem.
Yeah.
And that list in Timothy about the end times, men shall be lovers of themselves.
Yeah.
That's first on the list.
Yes. Yeah.
And we just need to learn to love yourself more. So I've used this example through the years about this young girl looks in the mirror. She says, I just hate myself. I'm so ugly. I just hate myself. But the truth of the matter is, the reason she's upset about what she perceives as her ugliness is because she loves herself. If she truly hated herself, she would be glad she was ugly.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
The reason we hate what we see is because we love ourselves so much.
Yeah.
So they turn him over to the Gentiles, take him down to Egypt, sell him into slavery, plotting to kill him all the while. And then even down in Egypt, of course, with Potiphar, he's falsely accused.
Yeah.
And in essence, Jesus was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin.
Mm-hmm.
And when Potiphar's wife kept coming to him, and you don't have to use your imagination much.
Mm-hmm.
In verse 6 of chapter 39, of course, he was sold. Potiphar takes him as a slave, and right away put him in charge of a lot, didn't he? So right away Joseph is elevated because he has such a good character. It says in verse 2 of 39, the Lord was with Joseph.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it says that even so. Let's think about this. The Lord was with Joseph. He was a successful man.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Joseph found favor in his sight, served him, made him overseer of his house or steward. All that he had, he put in his hand. So the elevation of Joseph, because the Lord was with him.
Yes.
There's another interesting time when it says the Lord was with Joseph in verse 21, when he's in prison. That's interesting to think about, huh?
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say, yeah, the Lord is with me when we're enjoying all kinds of bountiful blessings.
Right.
Elevated.
Yeah.
What about when we're on our face in prison? Can we say the Lord is with me then? And yet the same statement is made about Joseph in both places.
Paul said, he says, I'm paraphrasing, but I've been up and down. I've been, rich and poor. I've been all of these extremes.
Mm-hmm.
He says, but through it all, I've learned just to be content no matter what condition or state I'm in.
Mm.
And in my message this last Sunday, I asked the question, we're going through Psalm 1 and blessedness, happiness. I asked the question, why are there so many backslidden Christians and unhappy Christians? It's because they're pursuing happiness instead of holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you and I talked about that last week, or I mentioned that. And if they would just pursue holiness, then happiness would be a result. But when it's a pursuit, then we're going to be let down in a big way. And I don't think Joseph was necessarily pursuing happiness, but the Lord made sure that he was going to bring that happiness to him. Mm-hmm. All he had to do on his end was just be a good character. And God was with him in either way, whether it was up or down.
So Joseph is elevated in the house of Potiphar. In verse 4, Joseph found favor in his sight, served him, made him overseer of his house, all that he had to put in his hand. So it was from the time that he made him overseer of his house, all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Joseph was salt and light, making everything around him better. Mm-hmm. Even though he was in a he was in a place he did not want to be, in a position he didn't want to have. And yet he was still salt and light. It's hard to be salt and light when things are not going the way you want them to. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Mm-hmm. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So the Lord is blessing Potiphar, everything about Potiphar. Everything is going well as could be for Joseph. What did Jesus say? Beware when all men speak well of you.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Maybe other verses talk about the principle of beware when all things are going well for you, because Satan doesn't like that and he's going to try to come in and mess it all up. Or maybe even the Lord wants to remind us that we need humility, and if everything is going well, why do we need humility? So trouble is just around the corner.
Yeah.
Right when everything is going almost as perfect as that could be under the circumstances. You're just sold as a slave, and all of a sudden you're in charge of everything this important man has. And he trusts you completely.
There's a verse in Ecclesiastes. I don't remember where it's at, but something to the effect that there's no pattern of 2 days that are going to be good, and then the third day's bad, and then 2 days. Okay, yeah, there's no pattern. There's no rhyme or reason. So you can't really plan ahead in that way. You know, you just have to take it as it comes. I don't remember. It's in Ecclesiastes. It might be chapter 7. I don't remember.
I've often told people that one of the most dangerous times in our Christian life is when things are going very well. Like maybe right after a time of seeming victory, where it looked like you were going to be down, all of a sudden you're up. And there's something about that condition, that moment. I don't know if we let our guard down or Satan increases his efforts to destroy us, or a mixture of all those. But it does seem like the biggest downfall often happens right after a wonderful time of blessing or victory. Then all of a sudden there's a crash.
Yeah.
And I've seen this so many times in my ministry where it seems like right during or right after maybe some really good things have happened to the church or my family in our life.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's just some terrible news or something that just flattens you.
Yeah.
You think, boy, you talk about high up and high down so close together. And I know you've experienced it. Well,
do you know what I told the man that we just baptized? We were still in the water. And I said, brother, you now have a target on your back. We're going to pray for you.
That's the truth.
It is the truth.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So everything's going so well, and Potiphar thinks he's made the best business decision of his life by getting Joseph.
Yeah, right.
And he's just prospering right and left.
Yeah.
But here's kind of a problem in verse 6. So he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. He did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And it's interesting God puts this in here. And Joseph was, what does the old King James say? But New King James says handsome. Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. 39:6.
Goodly.
Goodly.
Was a goodly person and well favored.
Okay.
And
So
New King James says what?
handsome in form and appearance. They're saying the same thing. It's talking about his, a combination of things. It's talking about his looks.
Mm-hmm.
It's talking about his personality. It's talking about his character.
Yeah.
It's talking about everything about him is positive and good.
Yeah.
And a blessing.
Yeah. What does that remind you of? Luke chapter 1, where Jesus grew up in stature and in favor of God.
With God and men.
Yeah.
Yeah. As a young boy. He even had the favor of other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Joseph right here. That's good. That's a good connection. Problem is, Potiphar was gone a lot in his responsibilities.
Yeah.
Joseph was in the house, trusted, so he can come and go as he pleased.
Right.
And he was very attractive.
Yeah.
And Potiphar's wife saw an opportunity.
Yeah.
And Joseph was really put to the test. And she said, she cast, what does it say in verse 7? Lifted up her eyes toward. The New King James says, cast longing eyes on Joseph. She said, lie with me. And he refused. Said to his master's wife, my master does not know what is with me in the house, has committed all that he has in my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has kept anything back from me but you, because you are his wife. Now notice how great a character Joseph was.
Mm-hmm.
Where he elevated the reason not to give in to this temptation is, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
Mm-hmm.
He saw this as a real test of his relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the same God had allowed him to be sold into slavery.
Right.
The same God had allowed him to go down to Egypt.
Yeah.
It'd been easy for Joseph to say at this point, this powerful, wealthy, beautiful woman wants me, and God has deserted me, and my brothers hate me, and no one in the entire world will see or know what I am doing. I can get away with it. I'm in no danger of being caught.
Yeah.
And it says in verse 10, she attempted this day by day. How many days? How many weeks? How many months?
Yeah.
Trying to wear his
resistance. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, not to get too into human nature, but, he's older teens, younger 20s.
I was going to ask you, how old are you placing him right about now?
I would say maybe at the most a few years have passed for him to be elevated to this high position. I would say he's maybe mid-20s at the oldest, because he's 30 when he gets out of prison after 2 years and stands before Pharaoh. So I would say 25 at the oldest.
Okay.
Around 25, let's say.
Yeah.
But my point is, kind of at the prime of, what will we say, testosterone?
Yeah, manhood. Yeah.
Manhood.
Yeah, exactly.
Desire.
Yeah.
Sexual drive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Had not been with a woman, evidently, his whole life. He was in his mid-20s, and the opportunity is right there in front of him.
Yeah.
And evidently, maybe reading between the lines, but just naturally, she would have kept this a secret from everybody. So he's in a foreign land, very little danger of getting caught.
Yeah.
And it just been really, really easy for him to give into this.
Yeah.
And yet his character, and one reason he's such a type of Christ. Christ tempted in all points like we are, yet without sin.
Yeah.
In essence, Christ said often, even like to Satan at the wilderness temptation. But all through his life, he basically said, when tempted, how then, verse 9, can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And no doubt, in essence, Christ said that often in his life when faced with temptation. I do not want to sin against my Father. But Joseph, the amazing thing to me is that he could have felt deserted by God and justified.
Yes, he could have blamed God. Yeah,
he could have blamed God, and easily.
Yeah,
I mean the physical urge to give into this temptation had to be powerful.
Yeah,
I mean, he was human.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, well, how can I do this great wickedness, sin against God?
Yeah.
Just as a human being,
Yeah.
This had to be a very powerful temptation.
Yeah.
And for it to be continual, day after day after day.
And people blame God for a lot less, I think, than this.
Yes.
You know, I mean, like you said, he was in prison, sold, deserted by his family. He had a lot of reasons to blame God and be angry with God. And people seem to go there very quickly, blaming God for this, blaming God for that. But we see why God just stayed with this young man, because he had the character. And I'm thinking of Proverbs 7. I think it's Proverbs 7, where someone was looking out their window.
Yeah.
And they saw that foolish young man, you know, head on over to the harlot's house, you know. His resolve was just amazing. Like you said, he had
his resolve was amazing. His character was amazing.
Yes.
I mean, you look at his older brother, Judah, the bloodline of Christ.
Yeah.
How easily Tamar was able to tempt Judah, and Judah didn't even try to resist.
No.
And then later says, okay, how could, she wasn't even his daughter-in-law at the time.
Yeah.
How could she do such wickedness? Bring her here and we'll kill her.
Yeah, right.
You know, Mr. Righteous. And so she tells the person, says, okay, here's the items he gave me, because he didn't have any money. So you tell him, the person who owns this is the one I'm pregnant by.
Yeah.
Oh boy, can you imagine when Judah saw that?
Open mouth, insert foot.
At least he was honest enough to say, she, as wicked as she was and what she plotted, she's more righteous than I am.
More righteous than I, yeah.
So, you know, and Judah,
she had the goods on him. What else could he say? She
did.
Yeah.
But and would any of, so we know how easily Judah gave in to temptation.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly if Judah was in the position of Joseph, he'd have went for it, no problem. And probably the other brothers.
Yeah. Well, Reuben, you already mentioned Reuben.
Yeah.
He didn't have a problem.
Yeah. You know, a couple of them married Canaanite women. You know, so one reason why God wanted to get them out of there.
Yeah.
So Joseph was separate from his brothers in character, wasn't he?
But this is the same pattern that we see that God is looking for as he works through a people, for a people.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned here a few weeks ago that God is preparing not only a place, but a people.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look in the New Testament and we see that bride standing there with Jesus on Mount Zion, she will have had a character. There's a characteristic within her that separates her out from all others who weren't in that group. And she made herself ready. So there was something about her that kept her eye on the prize.
Mm-hmm.
She waited for her bridegroom. And so we're seeing Joseph keeping his eye on God, even in this situation. And that's the characteristic that God is looking for all throughout.
Well, of course, it's this is Joseph, a male being tempted by a female, but the church has many voices calling out to her. We have many voices calling out to us, basically saying, come lie with us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And the temptation is strong to to join up, to become intimate with false religions, false type of churches, wrong doctrines, wrong practices. And in doing so, we're committing wickedness and sinning against God.
Come, let us build with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you shall have nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
Our God will help us.
Yeah.
Not you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the attitude the church is supposed to have.
Mm-hmm.
So Joseph is not just a great type of Christ. He's a great example for us to follow in our own personal Christian life of virtue and purity. Because, we're living in a time, I mean, even like, I guess it still is, I don't know, I read these things once in a while, but it's either gambling or porn, are the two most visited sites on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've read in Christian type articles and of research and studies and surveys and stuff that there's a fair percentage of supposed Christian type men.
Yes.
On internet porn. And
well, you might remember a few years ago, there was like 300 pastors were caught up in this porn ring.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, just a few years ago. And so,
I mean, and that's that's such an alluring temptation, because you justify it by saying, well, I'm just looking, I'm not touching, I'm not physical contact, or I'm not with them in person. It's just images.
Yeah, but that's already been covered.
We can justify anything, can't we?
Yeah, but Jesus already covered that base, remember?
Yes, he did. He left with her in your heart. Yeah. I think Christ, in the Sermon on the Mount, he already anticipated the internet, didn't he?
Yeah. I think he did. Yes. Yeah. Well, we know that it was referenced, right? Because he said something to the effect.
Oh, here it comes. What kind of corny joke do you have?
He said, everything that you say will be shouted from the rooftops. I'm thinking everyone's satellite.
The satellite dishes on top of their roof.
Yes. I mean, come on, really? You know it was coming. Yeah, but it's back to your reference in Paul to Timothy, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God. And this is just a breakdown of our society. And of course, we're seeing this just move in this direction more and more and more, advanced by the internet, computers, and everything else.
Well, for instance, in verse 11, it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. As she caught him by his garment, said, "Lie with me." But he left the garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. This idea of no one would know what they had done. No one was there to see it.
Yeah.
And this day, back to the internet. I mean, that's the thing that makes it so strong and tempting, is that in the privacy of your home, you don't have to leave your home. Nobody can, nobody, there's no whatever money transaction maybe, or there's no
witnesses or whatever.
No witnesses, yeah. And so it just makes it that much more believing I'm getting away with it.
Yeah. Well, no witnesses except for two.
Two, yeah.
Yeah. One is God and one's your guardian angel.
Who will testify against me. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that it gives that detail of no one else was there. It would have been easy to get away with. He could have justified it as, I could have already been married by now, had my own wife and relations with her, and this would not have been a temptation. But God allowed me to come down here and be a slave, and I'm a young, strong, handsome man, and she's throwing herself at me, and boy, it would take a lot, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah.
To be able to resist that and resist it with such clarity and resolve.
Yeah.
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 I mean, he didn't stand around and say, "Well, let's just discuss this a little bit."
Right. Yeah. Give me 5. I'll think about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Or he didn't try to engage in a conversation of trying to get inside her marriage problems. Why are you wanting to have someone else besides you? That kind of extending the moment of the temptation is also a temptation.
Yeah.
To bring about a negative result of finally giving into it. The best thing to do when you're faced with a strong temptation is get away as quick as you can.
Yeah. Well, what is that proverb? Someone who sees trouble up ahead and hides himself versus the person who goes just headlong straight into it. Yeah. So, no, I think in this passage, it seems like he's going out of his way to set it up and give us the whole imagery of it in detail, which really makes his avoidance all the more spectacular because of the circumstances and the situation. In detail, no one was in the room, no one's in the house, and he still avoided it. He still resisted it, So he's building it up, the atmosphere.
So even in Egypt as a slave, his relationship with God was still primary.
It wasn't bitter.
No, it wasn't bitter.
No.
He's trying to make the best of a bad situation, and he still had a desire not to sin against God. And in one of the most powerful temptations, a young man who's alone and
his prime
that can face.
Yeah.
But then he also learned a lesson that, that old cliche, beware of a woman scorned.
Yeah.
Because he had done her no harm.
Right.
And she had just gone on. If that was her attitude, if this was her desire to be with another man, she could have found another man who would have been willing. But because he rejected her, she was out to destroy him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because Jesus did not go along with what Judaism had become, which is basically a harlot religion, and he would not lie with them and sin by going along with them, they set out to destroy him.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joseph could have said, here we go again.
Yeah.
I'm being falsely accused again.
Falsely accused again.
Yeah.
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 So she starts screaming and pitching a fit and accused him of wrongdoing, and she had the evidence. I mean, if you're the husband, you're the husband, what are you going to conclude other than what Potiphar concluded?
They didn't have security cameras, so it's her word against Joseph's,
So he finds himself in prison. But even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph, verse 21, and showed him mercy. And he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Okay, he's rising up even in prison, isn't he?
This guy just can't lose, can he? I mean, he can, but then he falls on his feet. He lands on his feet every time.
Lands on his feet. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's hand because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. So what a story.
It's an amazing story.
I think maybe we should leave it here, him in prison, because once he comes out of prison, we're going to transition more into the types of Christ at his second coming. And so this might, because we've gone on for a couple hours now, and it's longer than we normally go. And I had a feeling that we wouldn't get through all this in one session. But there's, there's 4 or 5 more on your handout and 4 or 5 more on mine that kind of transition over to Christ's second coming.
Oh no! By next week, I'm going to have another 70.
Let's see if you can come up with the longest list by next week.
Oh boy!
Yeah, so we'll pick up with Joseph in prison and how he gets out of prison, how he gets elevated, not by Potiphar, not by the prison keeper, but by Pharaoh himself.
Yeah,
which really is God elevating Joseph.
Yeah, amazing.
And we're going to tie this to some things about Christ in his first and second coming. So we'll close out on this and pick up here next session. But I enjoyed bantering back and forth.
Oh yes, as always, I enjoy it, brother. I hope our viewers enjoy it.
Most of the people who end up watching this session will have already developed their own list through the years and brought it out in sermons or lessons. But maybe we stirred up something that they hadn't thought of before, or just kind of like going back to a good old juicy hamburger and fries. It's good all over again.
Yeah. Just oozing with grease. Oh, well, this is a good session. Really good. I mean, they're all good, but just some really.
Well, Joseph is so enjoyable to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it really encourages us to look to God for grace to make the best out of bad situations.
Yes. Yeah.
And God blesses that kind of faith and humility, and God blesses that.
Yeah, he does.
And we are to be a blessing to those around us.
Yeah.
Because God is looking to elevate us to a position of authority and power.
Yeah.
If we follow the example of Joseph.
Yeah. Someone said Christians are supposed to be a fountain, not a drain.
You have all these little sayings just tucked away in the recesses of your brain. Thanks for your time today, Mike.
Well, thank you, brother. Really enjoyed it and looking forward to next week.
I guess my closing question would be, are your hands warm yet?
They're still cold. I'm going to put my jacket back on now.
Well, I'm thinking about changing into shorts and taking my shoes off.
Oh, cut it out.
Until next time, Mike. Thanks.
All right. Love you, brother.
Love you too.
Talk to you later.